Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of my Black Plague and Massive Darkness series. This time I'm painting Chromatis, but with a nightmarish twist. I'm starting off by adding some effects to the base using Vallejo Earth. I'm going to attempt to make it look like Chromatis is melting footprints into the stone. So first I'm putting down a dab of the Vallejo Earth, then dipping the end of my paintbrush in water and creating a small crater. The water is to prevent the Vallejo Earth from sticking to the handle. Next, I'm carefully smoothing out the side of the crater. I'm placing a second crater behind the first in a place where it looks like the hoof might have touched last. I'm also spreading a bit of the earth around the base of the other two hooves. I'm giving that a good 30 minutes to dry before priming the miniature. Just like in most of my videos, I'm using two different colors for the priming. I'm first priming the underside with Chaos Black, and then priming it from above at a 45-degree angle with Mechanicus Standard Gray. I'm next putting three colors onto my wet palette for Chromatis' coat. The coat will be black, but when I highlight it, I don't want it to look gray, but more of a bluish gray. To do this, I'm mixing Teclis Blue into Abaddon Black to introduce more blue pigments into the black. Then, as I add white scar, the resulting gray will have a bluish tint. So my first color looks almost completely black, but it's about a 1-to-1 mix of black and blue. For my second color, I'm adding just enough white scar to create a noticeably lighter tone. For all the areas that receive the black primer, I'm painting this with the first color, the bluish black. The mane, the tail, and the hair on the legs are getting a different color, so this is just for the body of the steed. For the rest of the body, I'm using the lighter blue-gray. So the majority of the body is going to be covered with this color, and where the black and the gray meet, I'm going to wet blend those two colors together. My paint is basically thinned down to a glaze. This is going to help make the wet blending and highlighting easier and smoother looking, but it's also going to take a lot more time. Instead of using 1 or 2 coats of a thicker paint, some areas might get 3 or 4 coats to brighten them up. The two-tone prime is really going to help at this point as well, since with a thin enough paint, the two tones will make our darks look darker and the lighter areas look lighter. And here you can see an example of me roughly wet blending the light and the dark together. Now I'm just switching back and forth between the light and the dark for the face, just adding some shadows with the dark paint in select places, like under the cheekbones. So here's how our evil unicorn is looking so far with the body painted. The next thing I'm going to do is apply a black wash using Nuln Oil Gloss. The reason I'm using the gloss instead of the regular wash is that the gloss version doesn't tint the paint nearly as much, and the pooling is much darker. There's already a faint difference between the light and the dark areas, so I don't want to obscure that with the wash. Once that's dried, I'm going back to the light gray-blue color on the wet palette, and I'm just going to brighten up the lighter areas of the body with some highlighting. This part is optional, especially if you had a bigger difference than me in your light and dark colors. So you can see here my paint is as thin as a glaze, and I'm only moving my brush strokes upward. This way most of the light paint ends up at the top of the body. Again, if you're using thin paints like this, you'll have to use a lot of layers. So just take your time and let each layer dry before you start the next one. I only ended up using 2 layers, and most of it was on top of the legs and the back. One extra place I focused the highlight color was near the mane and any place that had hair, since I wanted to add a small amount of object source lighting on these spots. And now, while I still have some of it on my palette, I'm going to use Abaddon Black to paint these little craters on the base. Next, I'm putting Ceremite White onto my palette, and I'm going to start by first painting the eyes and then all of the long hair. Anytime I paint something to look like fire, I first cover that area with white. It brightens the colors, and painting yellow over black would take about 10 layers of paint. So our unicorn is looking more and more evil with each step. As I said, I'm using Ceremite White, and I have it at about 50-50 water and paint. My Ceremite White is quite thick, however, since it's about 3 or 4 years old now. At this point, I'm being super careful. It took a long time to get that nice shiny black coat finished, so I'm slowing down as I get near the roots of the hair. Next up is the fire. Now you don't need to use all of these colors. In fact, all you need is yellow, orange, and black, and you can mix the other tones from those. You also don't need a wet palette for any of this, but it helps since it lets you take your time and easily go back and forth between your colors. So right now I'm putting down Cygnus Yellow and Hearthfire from P3, some Lava Orange from Army Painter, and a bit of Mephiston Red and Abaddon Black from Games Workshop. I'm also mixing a few extra tones. The first is about an equal mix of the Cygnus Yellow and Lava Orange to create something slightly darker than the Hearthfire. The next color I did not end up using. It was just a bit too red for fire, which was Lava Orange and Mephiston Red. And the last was a bit of the Lava Orange, Red, and Black mixed together. Now just to reiterate, you can get a perfect range of colors using the yellow, orange, and black in varying amounts, such as using yellow, then 2-to-1 yellow and orange, then 1-to-1, then pure orange, then orange with a bit of black, and so on. So here's what my palette looks like, and I'm going to start off by coloring all the white areas with some watered down Cygnus Yellow. Next, I'm using my lightest orange, the Hearthfire, to cover nearly the entire surface of the yellow. I'm starting very close to the roots of the hair. I'll only show you what I'm doing with the mane so I don't bore you, but I'm using the same process on the tail and the tufts of hair on the legs as I go. So now I'm on to the slightly darker orange, and I'm starting higher up this time. The idea is to get a nice transition from light yellow at the base to black or nearly black at the tips. Sometimes I'm wet blending into the previous color, but you don't really need to yet. I'm just kind of mapping out where I want each color to go and trying to decide if I like it or not. If the fire is looking too bright, I'll bring the orange further down towards the yellow. I'm also trying not to get a straight line across the mane with each color. Sometimes I'll paint a strand of orange further into the yellow, or a bit of light orange up into the darker orange, so it looks more flowing and natural. Now moving on with the next darkest orange. This one is the reddish one, though it looks really red on camera. I didn't end up using this anywhere else but the mane, and I covered most of it up later. If I were to do it again, I'd use the lava orange and a small amount of black to create a smoky orange instead of this reddish orange. Of course, you could always argue that it's magical fire, and it can be whatever color you want, so go ahead and paint it red, green, or blue flames if you want. So the second to last color I'm using is the lava orange and a bit of black added to create a color that's almost the same as Mournfang brown. It's thinned down quite a bit, and I'm just glazing the top of the flames with this. And finally I'm going with a pure black, thinned down so it's not completely overwhelming the orange color underneath. As I'm painting, I'm also constantly switching to the other orange colors to blend them in a little better and to touch up any mistakes. So now I'm basically using the exact same technique on the rest of the hair. There were a couple small differences, however. On the leg hair, I didn't use any black. The flames were too small, I thought. Also the tail, there were a couple deep grooves where I added some of the pure lava orange to try to make it look like the hair was hotter deeper down. So right here is where I add a thin strip of the orange and then just blend the darker color in around it. I only did this in 2 or 3 places on the tail, and just like I did with the mane, I'm extending some of the areas of the dark colors up into the light a little bit, and vice versa, just to give a better flowing look. Next I'm going to start painting the eyes and the nostrils. If our evil steed is burning from within, then its nostrils should be glowing, so first I'm painting the inside of each one with some Ceremite White. Next I'm using the Cygnus Yellow to paint over the entire eye on both sides, and then I'll do the same thing to the inside of each nostril. Next for the nostril, I'm using the Lava Orange and Cygnus Yellow mix to paint a ring around the inside of each nostril, and I'm following that up with my darkest orange to touch up the outside. To finish off the eyes, I'm using Fugan Orange Wash. I'm first basically drowning the eye with the wash, and then using a damp brush to wipe away the wash from the center of the eye. Next I'm going back to the base. I need to paint the hooves and the horn, but before I do that I want to dry brush all these craters using Mechanicus Standard Gray. The dry brushing is messy, so I want to do this before I paint the hooves. I'm also going to start painting the inside of the craters, since they too will be using the exact same colors that I used for the hair. I want the inside of the craters to look hot, so once again I'm starting off with the Ceremite White. After that I'm using yellow and then going through the same range of oranges. So the brightest will be at the center, then I'm just making rings with each color, the darkest of which will be the furthest from the center. Now I'm going to cover the entire base with Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'm creeping my brush up to the craters though, because I don't want to ruin that cool ashy look I've got from the dry brushing. Once that's done, I'm going to paint the hooves. I'm using the exact same colors once again, but I'm going in reverse order on the top part of the hoof. The bottom is going to be painted to mirror the hoof print that I just painted on the ground. So I'm switching back and forth between the bottom and the top of the hoof, though you don't need to do it this way. You could just do the bottom first, and then the top. The bottom is getting Ceremite White, and the top is getting a layer of the darkest orange. I ran out of the first batch, so I made another. This one is just about equal parts black and lava orange. While I'm painting the hooves, I'm also doing the horn with the same colors. The difference is that I'm starting with the black and orange mix near the base, and I'm going to a pure black for the top third of the horn. Hopefully this will create the illusion that the horn is the hottest near the head and coolest at the tip. So now I'm applying a slightly brighter layer onto the hooves, and I'm only doing the bottom half this time. My goal is to have the bottom of the hoof match the darkest color on the underside of the hoof, so that one just blends into the other. This is me mixing the final color for both the bottom of the hoof and the underside of the hoof. The only colors used in this mix are lava orange and black. Now I'm painting the underside of the hoof just like I did with the craters on the floor. First with the yellow, then through the ranges of orange until I reach the color I just mixed. I'm switching between the hoof and the underside of the hoof so that each has time to dry. I also wasn't happy with the brightness of the bottom of the horn, so I'm using the final color to brighten up the bottom third. This final color I'm applying is roughly 2 parts orange to 1 part black, but just eyeball it. Find a deep orange that looks good to you. So here I'm applying the final color all around the rim of the underside of the hoof, and then putting the final touch on the tip of the horn with some pure Abaddon Black. Next I'm going to finish off the base of the evil unicorn in nearly exactly the same way as all my other Massive Darkness videos. I'm first using Abaddon Black to trace out some random flagstone patterns onto the floor. Now, my OSL game isn't great, but I decided to add a bit under the flames on the legs and around the areas of hair on the body. For all the stones under the flames, I'm mixing a bit of white into some Skavenblight dinge and painting a light patch on the ground. Next, I'm painting all around that with some Skavenblight mixed with black, and then wet blending the two together. After that, I'll just paint the remaining flagstones with some random shades of grey. Once that's dry, I'm using several thin layers of Lamenters Yellow under the flames to give the impression that yellow light is shining on that spot. I'm then going to repeat that for the 2 rear legs. Finally, I'm using a few layers of the Lamenters Yellow around the edges of the hair where I highlighted at the beginning of the video. And it's okay to mix this into the hair a bit, since the first color is also a pure yellow. And And the last step before I hit this with a matte varnish is to paint around the rim with some dark gray. For all my previous miniatures and for this one, I'm using half Abaddon Black and half Eshin Grey. Once that dries completely, I'm spraying it with a layer of Tester's Dull Coat. And here's the final product. A very special thank you to all my patrons on Patreon. I'm doing my best to get at least 2 videos out a month, and you guys are really helping to motivate me to do that. If you want to help decide which miniature is painted next, and if you like the content and want to support this channel, you can do so for $1 a month on Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you very much for watching.